Hi, I'm professional photographer Paul Miguel, and in this video I'm going to give you my thoughts on the Canon M50, which I use for outdoor vlogging. If you're a subscriber, then welcome back. If you're new to this channel, then do consider clicking subscribe for lots of photography videos and tutorials. Now, I'm a nature photographer, so that means that I am vlogging outside almost all the time. So I'm not using this camera indoors with set up studio lighting and perfect sound. I'm having to use it outside in the environment and be very flexible. It's by no means a really in-depth review on this camera, but what I'm going to give you is my experiences specifically as an outdoor vlogger. I'm going to tell you why I think it's good for my style of vlogging. I'm going to show you some of the video settings I use, and I'm also going to show you a couple of the downsides as well. So the first thing to talk about is simply the size and weight. This is massively important for me for the kind of vlogging I do. So you can see this thing is pretty small, pretty compact, and it weighs 387 grams. So it's definitely a consideration if you're looking for something lightweight. Now I've just got the 15 to 45mm lens, which is like the kit lens. I've actually found this to be very good so far, not had any complaints really. The downside I think is in low light, so this lens might struggle a bit in low light, in which case it might be worth investing in something like an 11 to 22mm or even the 22mm f2 pancake lens. Flip screen. Absolutely invaluable, certainly for me. When I was looking for a new camera to upgrade, I didn't consider anything that didn't have a flip screen. I just completely ignored it. For me, I absolutely have to see what I'm doing. So the great thing about this is it's articulating, so it flips out, but it's also articulating. You can have it pretty much in any orientation you want, even if you were vlogging something higher up, you could turn it that way. And also really useful as well, if you turn it around this way, when you close it, when you're not using it, it's kind of got a cover along the back, so that's just going to help keep it safe, particularly if you're traveling around. My old camera, which I'm filming on now, which is a little compact Sony, the screen is not very easy to see in the sun particularly. That was one of the biggest disadvantages with it, so that was really important as well. I do think the screen on this is very, very good. So in bright sunshine, much easier for me to see the screen compared to the old camera. If you were to ask me what I think is the best feature of this camera, the M50, I would absolutely say autofocus. I'd actually read a lot about the autofocus capabilities, so it sounded good, but when I tried it, I would say I was really, really impressed and definitely a little bit surprised how good it was. So it uses a dual pixel autofocus system. Don't ask me how that works, I don't entirely know. All you need to know is it's got a very improved autofocus capability, not just for locking onto focus and reacquiring focus, but also for tracking subjects as well, which is absolutely ideal if you're following yourself vlogging out in the field. So I use the servo autofocus for when I'm out in the field vlogging, and I also use the tracking mode as well. So with that, it will just track your face as you move along. You can tap the screen on your face if you want to be absolutely sure, but it seems to just do it pretty much automatically really. Now, when you first switch the camera on, you might find these rather basic looking menus on the screen, and I would suggest that you change that. So what you want to do is go across to display level settings, go into there, and it gives you a choice of menu display. You've got guided or standard, and I would suggest that you switch it on to standard. So what about the video settings? What's the best settings to use? Well, you've got an option. So when you turn the camera onto video mode, you'll have two options. One which is auto video mode and the other which is manual mode. Now I have used the camera a few times in automatic and it can look okay. The only thing with that is you don't know exactly the settings that the camera is picking, and I have found it just sometimes to look a little bit more unnatural. So you have less flexibility in auto mode, but you do have the option to adjust the exposure, so you can underexpose or overexpose if you want to. So I much prefer to use the manual video mode. And then the important thing really is to set your frame rate and shutter speed. So you go in to select the frame rate, the frames per second, and you've got a few options in there. A lot of the time I'm shooting on 25 frames per second, and that just gives quite a natural look, which a lot of people call more cinematic look, which I'd agree with, and it's the one that I prefer personally. Whatever frame rate you choose, you want to choose a shutter speed that is double that. So I'm usually choosing 25 frames a second, and then going to go to my shutter speed and I'm going to select 1/50th of a second, which is double. Alternatively, if you're selecting 50 frames a second, then you need to use a shutter speed that is 1/100th of a second. Now this goes back to older times of using film for video, and I don't know the entire reasoning behind it. If you search on YouTube, you'll find videos explaining the 180-degree rule. Like stills photography, you've still got the aperture and the ISO to deal with as well. So once you set your frame rate and shutter speed, then you can adjust the aperture and the ISO. And with the aperture, the way you adjust the aperture is going to affect how the footage looks. So for example, you might want to get that nice shallow depth of field effect, in which case you're going to choose a wide aperture, and then I would just say probably adjust the ISO to balance the exposure so everything looks right. Just bear in mind, as you bump up the ISO very high, then the footage is going to start to look a little bit grainier. I do think it's important when you're doing a review like this that you actually show some footage of the camera that you're reviewing. So at the moment I'm shooting on the old Sony compact camera. Hopefully you'll see the difference in quality. Now I'm going to show you some of the footage that I've actually shot on the Canon M50 fairly recently using the 15 to 45mm kit lens, and I'm shooting on 25 frames a second with a shutter speed of 1/50th. At the moment we're having a warm spell and clear nights, which means a good chance of mist early on, and we've definitely got some mist today. And here we have some more creative footage where I've actually shot at 50 frames a second, and then I've slowed that down in post-production by 60%. Just a quick mention about 4K. This camera does have 4K mode, and basically that's just a higher resolution. I haven't used it on this camera yet. I haven't really felt the need to. I think shooting in 25 frames a second at 1080 is absolutely fine for me. With the 4K, you've got an increased resolution, but there's a couple of downsides with that. If you use 4K, it actually increases the crop factor. It kind of zooms in even more. So if you've already got a 1.6 crop, then it's magnifying it again even more. So that's something to bear in mind. Also, the autofocus is nowhere near as snappy and effective as it is if you're shooting in 1080. So by all accounts, the autofocus is much slower in 4K. The advantage of 4K, as well as the resolution, is you can actually take a screen grab. So you're able to take a screen grab frame from your video footage. And then there is the ability to do a really high frame rate as well, which is 100 frames a second. So you'll go into kind of like a separate section of the frame rate, go and enable that, and that will give you the high frame rate of 100 frames a second. The disadvantages of the high frame rate is that you have to shoot in a lower resolution at 720 pixels, and the other big disadvantage is that you don't get autofocus. So for the high frame rate, you'd be having to use manual focus. So once I've got the exposure settings in there, I'll make sure it's on autofocus, and then if I need to, I'll just tap the screen, I'll just tap where I want to focus, and then the camera's going to keep tracking on that. One of the things I really like about this, I think it's a really useful feature, is that you can actually switch the autofocus off. You can switch it temporarily onto manual focus. So you just want to use manual focus for a particular reason, and all you need to do is literally just press across here and it will switch from autofocus to manual focus, and then just switch back when you want to go back to auto. This camera does have pretty good image stabilisation. I'm quite happy with that. One thing just to mention is the digital IS. So if you go into the menu, the camera menu and go across to number 5, you'll see the IS settings, the image stabilization. If you go in there, you'll see IS mode and digital IS. Now, I would suggest keeping the IS mode switched on, but the digital IS, I would actually disable that. So I've read a few things about the digital IS, a few negative things, and I had an issue with the video footage myself, which appeared to be because of the digital IS. So I would say, just to be safe, keep the IS mode on, but the digital IS, I would keep that one switched off. The other thing I love is this little Q menu. So pressing info, if you make sure you've got the Q menu on the screen, if you tap that, then it brings up a few options of things that you might want to change, things that you might more commonly want to change. So you can go into the video shooting mode to use auto or manual again, change the autofocus method, so maybe a wider zone or the tracking one, and also you can go back into the frame rate. So if you want, you can change the frames per second. Also gives you the options of colour balance and a couple of other things as well. So that Q menu I think is really useful when you're vlogging. Colour balance, this is a bit more of a personal one. You can play around with the colour balance. Personally, I like to do exactly the same thing on this camera that I do with my Canon 1DX, and that is to actually set the colour balance, the Kelvin. So I set the colour temperature at 5400, and I just find it gives very consistent results. I do think the colours that come out of this camera, and probably Canon in general, are very, very good, very lifelike, realistic colours. Now, there are a couple of things that really annoyed me on the camera. So the first one, which is one of the most annoying things ever, and it happens on a lot of mirrorless cameras, is that the screen will keep switching off. So what happens is when you put your hand in front of the viewfinder, it's difficult to see here, the screen will actually switch itself off. So every time you put your hand near the viewfinder, wave across it, which you usually do non-deliberately, the screen switches off, which is incredibly annoying. Luckily, there is a way to fix this, thank God. You want to go into the menu, go across to the wrench, go to display settings, then display control, and then it will give you an option of auto and manual. It will be on auto if this is happening to you. Switch it to manual. Once you've switched it to manual, you can then happily wave your hand in front of the viewfinder as much as you like, and the screen will not disappear. So the second annoyance, which is by no means on a par with the first one, the viewfinder issue, and that is when you want to change the battery but you've got a release plate on the bottom. So I always have a release plate on the bottom of all my cameras, and the problem is when you come to change the battery, you flip this little compartment up, this little door, and basically the release plate gets in the way, so you can't take the battery out. But it's not actually as bad as it seems. You don't have to entirely take the release plate off and put it back on again, which would be a pain. So all you need to do is just unscrew the release plate a little bit and then drop it down like that, and then you'll find that the compartment will open. And then you can change your battery. So what about the battery life? I would say, to be honest, it's not fantastic. I think there is a claim of one battery doing about 120 minutes of video. That doesn't sound right to me from my experience. I used it the other day, maybe it wasn't 100% charged battery, and it was fairly cold conditions, and I'm pretty sure that battery exhausted in less than an hour. So do bear that in mind. This is probably one of the disadvantages, and this is why I've got another battery here as well. So I've got one in the camera and I've got another 2 batteries. So I actually have 3 batteries for the Canon M50, and I try to make sure that I have all 3 batteries with me whenever I'm out vlogging. So definitely bear that in mind. There's other cameras, other Sony, Panasonic, that may have much better battery life. There is a really important shortcut which can help you prolong your battery life. So this one I think is really important, useful tool on the M50. Go across to the wrench and number 5, which is custom functions. And go into custom functions, press set again, and then that gives you a number of different buttons on there. And you go down to the last one, which is the bin, or if you're American, trash can. And you'll see there it's got these like little Z's or Z's, and select that, and then basically what that's done is assign that bin button to temporarily switch the camera off, or at least put it on standby, kind of send it to sleep for a little bit. And that works brilliantly, because all you need to do is then literally tap that bin button, the bottom button there, and the screen goes off, viewfinder goes off, puts the camera temporarily to sleep, and it saves battery. And then when you want to start filming again, you want to start vlogging, you simply half press the shutter and everything will come back on. So really useful shortcut, very good way of helping to prolong the battery life. So I talked a lot about how I vlog and the video settings. What I haven't mentioned so far is the sound. Sound is a really important part of your videos if you're vlogging. And at the moment I'm using this microphone, which is the Rode microphone. And I would definitely advise trying an external microphone. The internal microphone on the Canon M50 is actually not too bad at all, but the sound is definitely improved with an external mic. You can use an external mic on this camera, and it's got a little port here where you plug that in and the actual microphone attaches to the hot shoe. And then also I've got this here, this fluffy device which you've probably seen, which is the dead cat, and this really makes a big difference. It just basically eliminates wind noise, and the difference of the sound with and without a dead cat can be really huge. So if you're going to get an external mic, I would definitely buy yourself a dead cat to go on there as well. This microphone I'm using at the moment is really a directional microphone, so it's best when I'm talking towards the camera like I am now. But I'm actually going to look at buying a smaller one, which is a multi-directional. Sometimes I may be holding it like this and talking to the camera, so it may be better multi-directional. But so far, using the Rode micro mic, very impressed with the sound. The main issue I have with this is when I first got it, it kind of comes on top of this plastic thing, and I don't know why it's designed like this, and it would bob up and down like this, like really badly. Now, apart from it being really irritating, the sound can actually, if it does that a lot, it will actually make sound, and then that can translate onto your video, which you really don't want. So what I've done is I've actually got some green garden wire, so it's kind of like I've wrapped it around the plastic bit with a green garden wire, and then also I've got an elastic band, and I've attached the microphone to the bottom of the viewfinder, and I've found it may not make a huge difference, but I found it just seems to reduce the bobbing up and down a little bit. Now, to get the best sound, you will need to make a couple of adjustments. Go into the menu, and then it's under the camera. It's actually number one, the first one. You'll see sound recording. So if you go in there, you'll see auto, manual and disable, and what I've done is select manual, and then you'll see record level underneath there, and you can vary this record level. You'll see the lights flashing underneath, and the louder you talk, the further along it gets, and you'll see the number 12 there as well. And the advice is, and this is what I've done, and I think it works well, there's a spider on the lens, don't get in the way, thank you. It's just talk to the camera normally, and what you want is for those lights to be hitting 12 as a maximum. You don't really want it to be going above that. So if you just adjust that level until the lights are hitting a maximum of 12, and then you should be good to go. In terms of camera support, something like this is absolutely ideal if you're wanting to be doing sections to the camera like I am now, where you want everything nice and stationary and solid. This is a tripod from K&F Concepts, and I did a review on this specific tripod. I'll put a link on the screen to that video if you want to have a look. This is just very lightweight, so if you're an outdoor vlogger like me, then a lightweight tripod like this is really useful. It means you can still do solid shots and B-roll, but it's not so heavy that it's a real bind to carry around. So lightweight tripod with the Canon M50 I think is definitely a good option. And if you're an outdoor vlogger, then you're almost certainly going to be using something like this. And again, this is just one of the benefits of the Canon M50 is the weight. So I couldn't have something very heavy for my style of vlogging. On top of here, for vlogging, it's really not a lot of weight to carry. The Canon M50 really is an excellent camera for vlogging. It's got a few disadvantages, but on the whole, I think it's very good value, and it's a reasonable price as well. If you want to pick one up second hand, you can probably pick one of these cameras up along with a 15 to 45mm kit lens for 500 of your British pounds. I'll put a couple of videos here on the screen, so feel free if you want to watch one of these, and also do consider clicking the subscribe button for plenty more nature photography videos and tutorials. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.